What if the greatest truth your soulmate was meant to hear was never hidden from them by fate, but by the silence of someone who believed they were protecting everyone involved? Some secrets aren't buried because they are dangerous. They remain unspoken because the people carrying them convince themselves that keeping quiet is the safest choice. But silence has a limit, and when that limit is finally reached, even the strongest promise begins to break. That is exactly what happened. Someone who had carried an important truth about you for far too long could no longer ignore the weight of it. Without planning to change anyone's life, they finally spoke the words they had kept locked inside. In that single conversation, your soulmate heard something they were never expecting, and the entire story they believed about you began changing before their eyes. Welcome, chosen soul. If this message has found you today, it may be because the universe is revealing that hidden truths always surface when the heart is finally prepared to receive them. The secret itself was not filled with drama or unbelievable revelations. Its power came from something much deeper. It explained the silence you never defended, the choices you never fully explained, and the distance that had been misunderstood for so long. As your soulmate listened, memories they once viewed through confusion suddenly carried an entirely different meaning. Questions they believed would never be answered quietly found their missing pieces. In that moment, they realized they had never known the complete story. And once the whole truth entered their heart, they could never see you the same way again. As the conversation continued, your soulmate realized that the secret they were hearing wasn't changing your past. It was changing their understanding of it. Every sentence seemed to unlock another unanswered question they had quietly carried for far too long. Moments that once felt confusing suddenly began fitting together with remarkable clarity. They remembered times when your actions didn't seem to match what they believed you were feeling. They remembered conversations that ended too soon, silences that felt impossible to understand, and decisions that never seemed to have a clear explanation. Back then, they accepted those moments as mysteries they would never solve. Now, with one hidden truth finally revealed, those mysteries no longer felt random. They became pieces of a story that had always been incomplete. For the first time, your soulmate understood that they had spent so much time judging individual moments without ever seeing the entire picture. What surprised them most was that the truth wasn't dramatic enough to belong in a movie. It wasn't built around betrayal, shocking confessions, or impossible coincidences. Instead, it was something much quieter, and because it was quiet, it carried even greater power. It revealed intentions that had been misunderstood, circumstances that had remained invisible, and emotions that had never been expressed aloud. Your soulmate realized that many of the conclusions they reached about you had been based on missing information rather than reality. They had filled empty spaces with assumptions because no one had ever given them the missing pieces. Now those empty spaces were disappearing one by one, replaced by understanding that felt both comforting and heartbreaking at the same time. As they continued listening, memories they hadn't revisited in years began returning with astonishing clarity. They remembered the way you looked at certain moments when words failed you. They remembered occasions when you seemed distant, yet there was something in your expression that suggested a much deeper story. At the time, they believed your silence meant indifference or uncertainty. But now they realize silence often carries meanings that words cannot fully express. Sometimes people remain quiet, not because they have nothing to say, but because they are protecting something too important to explain carelessly. That realization struck your soulmate with incredible force because it challenged one of the biggest assumptions they had carried for so long. They began wondering how many times they had mistaken quiet strength for emotional distance. The more they reflected, the more they recognized a pattern that had always been present. Every decision you made, even the ones they once questioned, carried a consistency they had failed to appreciate. You rarely acted impulsively. You rarely allowed temporary emotions to control permanent choices. Even when circumstances became difficult, you remained true to the values that guided your heart. Looking back now, your soulmate saw that consistency with completely different eyes. They realized that while other people often changed according to situations, your character remained steady. It wasn't because life had been easy for you. It was because integrity had become part of who you were. The secret they had just heard helped them understand why that consistency had always existed. And suddenly, everything about your behavior made far more sense than it ever had before. The universe has a remarkable way of allowing truth to arrive through ordinary conversations. It rarely announces itself with dramatic signs or impossible miracles. Instead, it quietly enters a person's life through one honest sentence that changes the meaning of everything they thought they already understood. That was exactly what happened here. The person revealing the secret probably never realized how deeply their words would affect your soulmate. They weren't trying to rewrite history. They were simply speaking honestly after carrying the burden of silence for too long. Yet honesty has a power that no carefully constructed misunderstanding can withstand forever. Once spoken, it begins reshaping the heart in ways that cannot easily be undone. Your soulmate also began thinking about all the moments they wished they had asked different questions instead of accepting simple answers. There were opportunities to understand you more deeply that they allowed to pass because they believed they already knew enough. They now recognize how dangerous assumptions can become when they replace genuine understanding. It is far easier to judge a situation than to patiently uncover everything hidden beneath it. Looking back, they realized you had never demanded that people instantly understand your journey. You simply continued walking your path, trusting that one day the truth would speak louder than any misunderstanding ever could. That quiet confidence now impressed your soulmate more than anything else, because it revealed a kind of emotional strength that cannot be manufactured. As these realizations settled inside them, another emotion quietly appeared: humility. Instead of becoming angry at the past, they became aware of how limited their perspective had once been. They understood that every person carries battles invisible to everyone else. Every silence hides a reason. Every difficult decision has a story behind it. The secret they had finally heard reminded them that judging someone without knowing the complete truth often creates misunderstandings that could have been avoided with patience. That lesson reached far beyond your connection. It began transforming the way they viewed everyone around them. They became slower to assume and quicker to seek understanding, because they now knew how easily appearances can conceal reality. What affected them most was realizing that you had continued, living your life without trying to force anyone to believe your side of the story. You hadn't chased approval. You hadn't spent your energy correcting every misunderstanding. Instead, you allowed time, character, and truth to quietly do their work. Your soulmate now sees that decision as one of the greatest demonstrations of inner peace they have ever witnessed. Anyone can argue endlessly to defend themselves, but very few people possess the courage to trust that truth will eventually reveal itself when the moment is right. The secret they heard did not create a new version of you. It simply removed the veil that had prevented them from seeing the person you had always been. By the end of that conversation, your soulmate realized they weren't discovering someone new. They were finally meeting the real you for the very first time. Every unanswered question had led to this moment. Every misunderstanding had quietly prepared them to appreciate the truth with a depth they never could have reached before. And as they walked away carrying this new understanding, one thought refused to leave their heart. If one hidden truth could completely transform the past they believed they understood, then perhaps everything they thought was lost between the two of you had never truly disappeared at all. It had simply been waiting for the entire story to finally be told. The moment the entire truth settled into your soulmate's heart, they expected to feel relief. After all, unanswered questions had finally found their answers, and a story that once felt incomplete now made sense in ways they never imagined. But instead of relief arriving first, something much heavier took its place. It was the quiet realization that knowing the truth also meant facing everything they had misunderstood because they never had access to it before. They began replaying countless memories, not because they wanted to hold on to the past, but because every memory now carried a completely different meaning. Conversations they once believed were ordinary suddenly revealed hidden emotions. Moments they thought represented distance now reflected sacrifice. Decisions they questioned now looked like acts of quiet courage. It was as though someone had taken the same story they had lived through and illuminated every page with a light that had never been there before. For the first time, your soulmate understood that truth has a remarkable way of humbling the heart. It rarely arrives with pride or certainty. Instead, it gently exposes how little we sometimes know about another person's journey. They realized they had interpreted your silence according to their own fears instead of your reality. When you chose not to explain everything, they assumed there was nothing left to understand. Now they recognize that silence often belongs to people carrying burdens too deep for ordinary conversations. Not every truth can be spoken at the moment it happens. Sometimes circumstances demand patience, and sometimes protecting someone else requires accepting temporary misunderstanding. Looking back, your soulmate now sees that many of your choices were never acts of distance. They were acts of quiet strength that required more courage than they had ever imagined. As these realizations continued unfolding, another emotion quietly appeared: regret. Not the kind of regret that fills someone with hopelessness, but the kind that grows from sincere understanding. They found themselves wondering how different certain moments might have been if they had known the whole story from the beginning. They remembered opportunities to ask deeper questions, but choosing assumptions instead. They remembered times when they wished you had explained yourself, never realizing you may have been carrying reasons you simply couldn't reveal. The painful part wasn't learning that the past couldn't be changed. The painful part was realizing how many beautiful moments had been overshadowed by incomplete understanding. Every reflection reminded them that appearances often hide battles the world never sees. The universe, however, never reveals truth simply to awaken regret. It reveals truth so wisdom can take its place. Your soulmate slowly began understanding that this experience wasn't meant to punish them for what they didn't know. It was teaching them something far more valuable. Genuine understanding requires patience. Real love cannot survive on assumptions alone. Every meaningful connection deserves the space for truth to unfold in its own time. They realized how often people rush to conclusions because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. Yet certainty built on incomplete information is far more dangerous than honest patience. This lesson reached deeply into their heart because they knew it would forever change the way they approached every relationship in their life. As they reflected further, they also discovered something unexpected about themselves. They had always believed they trusted their intuition, yet they now saw how easily outside circumstances, unanswered questions, and incomplete stories had influenced their perception. They weren't disappointed in you anymore. They were disappointed that they hadn't listened more carefully to the quiet feeling inside them that occasionally suggested there was more to your story than anyone understood. That inner voice had whispered long before the truth was spoken, but they had allowed uncertainty to become louder than intuition. Now they understand that the soul often recognizes authenticity before the mind gathers enough evidence to explain it. Perhaps the greatest transformation came when they stopped focusing on what the secret revealed about you and started focusing on what it revealed about themselves. They discovered the importance of humility, the danger of assumption, and the extraordinary power of giving someone the benefit of the doubt. They realized that every person carries chapters invisible to the outside world, and that judging someone's actions without knowing those hidden chapters can lead even the kindest heart toward misunderstanding. Instead of feeling bitterness toward the past, they now carry a quiet gratitude for the lesson, because without it, They might never have learned the difference between hearing part of a story and truly understanding the whole of it. Now, whenever your soulmate thinks about you, they no longer remember unanswered questions first. They remember the truth that finally gave those questions meaning. They understand that your silence was never emptiness, your patience was never weakness, and your distance was never proof that you cared less. Those were simply chapters they didn't yet know how to read. And perhaps the hardest realization of all is not that someone kept your secret for so long. It is realizing that once the entire truth was finally spoken, they could no longer return to being the person they were before hearing it. Their understanding of you had changed forever, and with it, their understanding of themselves. There is a reason the truth remained hidden until this exact moment, and it has very little to do with secrecy. Your soulmate now understands that if they had heard this same truth months or years earlier, they probably would not have accepted it. The human heart often rejects answers it is not emotionally prepared to receive. At an earlier point in their journey, they were still looking at life through old fears, unfinished wounds, and expectations that quietly shaped every conclusion they reached. Even if someone had revealed everything back then, they might have questioned it, dismissed it, or convinced themselves it couldn't possibly be true. But time has a remarkable way of softening certainty and replacing it with wisdom. Every experience your soulmate lived through after that chapter quietly prepared them for this revelation. Without realizing it, life was removing the barriers that once prevented them from seeing your heart clearly. The universe rarely reveals life-changing truths before they can create lasting transformation. Think of a seed hidden beneath the soil. From the surface, it appears as though nothing is happening. Days pass, seasons change, and the ground remains still. Yet beneath that silence, roots are forming, strength is developing, and life is preparing itself for the moment it can finally break through into the light. Had the seed been forced to rise too early, it would never have survived. In the same way, the truth about you remained beneath the surface, not because it lacked importance, but because it required the right season to reveal its full meaning. Your soulmate now realizes that what once felt like delay was actually quiet preparation. As they reflected more deeply, they began noticing how every challenge they experienced had unexpectedly equipped them for this moment. They encountered people whose words couldn't be trusted, teaching them the value of honesty. They experienced relationships built on appearances, helping them recognize the rare beauty of authenticity. They discovered that promises can be spoken easily, while integrity is proven only through time. Every lesson reshaped their perspective until they became someone capable of appreciating qualities they once overlooked. Looking back, they understand that the person who first met you and the person who has now heard the entire truth are not the same. Experience has transformed them. Their heart has become slower to judge, quicker to listen, and far more willing to search beneath the surface before reaching conclusions. The person who finally revealed your secret may believe they simply spoke a few overdue words. But your soulmate now senses something much greater was unfolding. The universe often chooses ordinary people to deliver extraordinary moments. The messenger may never fully understand the importance of what they have done, yet their honesty arrives at exactly the right time. Had they spoken earlier, their words might have been ignored. Had they remained silent longer, unnecessary misunderstandings could have continued growing. Instead, everything aligned with remarkable precision. The truth arrived not a moment too soon and not a moment too late. It appeared exactly when your soulmate had become emotionally ready to recognize it without resistance. This realization has also changed the way your soulmate views timing itself. For a long time, they believed delays were signs that something had gone wrong. Now they see that delays often protect truths that would otherwise be wasted. Not every answer belongs to every season. Some answers require patience because they are meant to change not only what a person knows, but also who that person becomes. Your soulmate understands this now. The hidden truth did far more than explain your past. It transformed the lens through which they now see trust, love, forgiveness, and human connection itself. That kind of change could never have happened overnight. It required every experience that came before it. As they continue carrying this new understanding, one thought remains with them more than any other. The secret was never delayed to keep two hearts apart forever. It was delayed so that when the truth finally emerged, it would no longer compete with fear, assumption, or misunderstanding. It would stand on its own, undeniable and complete. Your soulmate now knows that the strongest truths are not the ones spoken first. They are the ones that arrive after life has prepared the heart to recognize them completely. And now that they have finally heard the entire story, they understand that destiny was never working against your connection. It was patiently waiting until the truth could no longer be questioned, ignored, or misunderstood again. Now that your soulmate knows the entire truth, something irreversible has happened inside them. The story they carried for so long can no longer survive because it was built on incomplete understanding. Every assumption that once seemed convincing has quietly fallen away, replaced by a much deeper awareness of who you truly are. They no longer think about your silence as something mysterious or confusing. They understand it was the silence of someone carrying a burden without asking others to carry it for them. They no longer see your patience as hesitation. They recognize it as quiet strength. Even the distance that once felt impossible to understand now appears through an entirely different lens. What they once believed was emotional separation now looks like a chapter shaped by circumstances they never had the opportunity to see. The truth has not rewritten your past. It has simply removed the shadows that prevented your soulmate from seeing it clearly. Since hearing everything, they have found themselves reflecting less on what happened and more on what remained unchanged through it all. Despite misunderstandings, despite unanswered questions, despite the passage of time, one thing never disappeared: your character. You remained the same person whether people understood you or not. You continued choosing integrity when explaining yourself would have been easier. You continued showing kindness without demanding recognition. You allowed your actions to speak even when your words would have been ignored. Looking back now, your soulmate realizes that this consistency was quietly proving the truth, long before anyone finally spoke it aloud. They simply weren't able to recognize it until every missing piece was placed before them. There is a certain kind of peace that only arrives after confusion has completely dissolved. That is the peace your soulmate is beginning to experience now. The endless questions that once circled through their mind no longer carry the same weight because they finally understand the reason behind them. Instead of wondering why things happened the way they did, they have started appreciating how every answer arrived exactly when it was meant to. This doesn't erase the sadness they sometimes feel when thinking about the misunderstandings that once stood between you, but it transforms that sadness into wisdom rather than regret. They understand that every soul grows through moments of incomplete understanding, and sometimes the greatest lessons come from discovering that reality was far more beautiful than fear allowed them to believe. The universe has quietly taught your soulmate something they will carry for the rest of their life. Truth does not always arrive through loud revelations or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it waits patiently behind ordinary conversations, unexpected confessions, and the courage of one person who finally decides they can no longer remain silent. What changes a life is often not the volume of the truth, but its timing. A single honest conversation, spoken at exactly the right moment, can accomplish what years of speculation never could. Your soulmate now understands that destiny often moves in silence until the perfect moment arrives for everything hidden to become visible. Perhaps the most meaningful change is that your soulmate has stopped depending on other people's interpretations to understand your heart. They no longer measure you by rumors, assumptions, or incomplete stories. Instead, they trust what they have now seen for themselves. Every memory has been re-examined. Every unanswered question has found a place within a larger picture. Every misunderstanding has become part of a lesson rather than a permanent wound. This new perspective has given them something incredibly valuable, the confidence to trust direct experience over borrowed opinions. It is a lesson that extends far beyond your connection, shaping the way they now approach every meaningful relationship in their life. As they continue moving forward, they also understand that the past cannot be rewritten. Certain conversations will always remain unfinished, and some moments will exist only as memories. But the truth has given those memories a different meaning. Instead of carrying confusion, they now carry understanding. Instead of carrying doubt, they carry respect. Instead of carrying unanswered questions, they carry quiet gratitude for finally knowing the complete story. They realize that while time cannot return lost opportunities, it can transform the heart of the person remembering them. That transformation is perhaps the greatest gift the truth has brought, and this is where destiny quietly reveals its greatest miracle. Not through extraordinary signs or impossible coincidences, but through the simple power of honesty, finally reaching the heart that needed to hear it. Your soulmate now knows that your story was never defined by the parts they misunderstood. It was defined by the truth that patiently waited beneath every silence, every delay, and every unanswered question. They understand that real character does not need constant defense because time eventually becomes its strongest witness. When every secret has finally been spoken, when every hidden chapter has finally been revealed, only one thing remains impossible to deny. The person they thought they understood was even more genuine, more compassionate, and more remarkable than they had ever imagined. And now that the entire truth has finally found its way into their heart, they know they can never return to seeing you through the eyes of yesterday, because truth has forever changed the way they see both you and the journey your souls were always meant to share.